Hello friends, how are you? I hope your preparation is going well. Today I'm going to discuss with you what is primary deficit. This is a very important topic and this indicator is given in every budget, but many students get confused between what is primary deficit and what is fiscal deficit. Actually the difference is very simple and I will try to explain this with the help of an example. If you like the content that I'm creating for UPSC exam, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Also share the video with other aspirants so that everybody benefits. If you have any doubts with respect to UPSC preparation, then please consider joining the Telegram group that I have created. The link to that group is in the description below. So let's start with the video. Before understanding what is primary deficit, you need to have some basic idea about fiscal deficit. I'm sure you already know it, but let me just brush up what is fiscal deficit. Basically, fiscal deficit means the shortfall between expenditure of the government and receipt of the government. Government spends money, that is expenditure, in two heads, that is capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. Similarly, government receives money under two heads, capital receipts as well as revenue receipts. Now you need to know the difference between capital receipt and capital expenditure, revenue receipt and revenue expenditure. If you do not know the basic difference, then there is a video I have created on this topic. Please watch that video. The link to that video is also provided in the description below. So this difference between expenditure and receipt is called as fiscal deficit, right? For example, if we look at 23-24 budget, then government said that 5.9% of GDP will be the fiscal deficit. Fine. And government's estimated expenditure was 45 lakh 3097 crore. This is both capital expenditure as well as revenue expenditure. And government said that receipts other than borrowing, obviously we do not include borrowing in receipts. Why? Because borrowing is actually the fiscal deficit. Whatever the deficit is there, that much we will borrow. So we will not include this in calculating deficit, right? So receipts, how much? 27 lakh 16,281 crore. Now, if we deduct this 27 lakh 16,281 crore from 45 lakh 3,097 crore, what we get is fiscal deficit. Now, in this deficit, there are two components. One is the fresh borrowing. How much is the borrowing to meet the requirements of this financial year? And it also contains another component which is a big component, and that is interest payments on previous borrowings. Every year government has fiscal deficit, right? For example, let's say 2022-23 fiscal year government borrowed, and in 2021-2022 government borrowed. How government borrows? By issuing bonds through RBI, and these bonds have to be paid coupon rate, which is the interest rate, right? And that interest has to be paid by the government. So this fiscal deficit also includes interest payments for previous loans. And when we remove interest payment from fresh borrowings, it gives us primary deficit. It is as simple as that. But let me explain this with the help of a simple example. Let's say you are preparing for civil services exam. You needed 1000 rupees in 2022. You borrowed it from a friend of yours, and your friend was very shrewd. He did not give you simply, he said, I will give you on 10% rate of interest. Now, how much you need to pay your friend every year? 100 rupees. In 2023, this year, let's say you had requirement for 500 rupees. Now, you wanted to borrow 500, but you have to borrow 600, right? Because 500 is 2023's requirement and 100 is the interest payment that you have to pay your friend from whom you borrowed in 2022. So 100 rupees is interest payment on previous borrowing, 500 rupees is fresh borrowing. Total you need to borrow this year is 600, right? Now this 600 is called as fiscal deficit. This 500 that you need to borrow this year is called as primary deficit. That is why it is called as primary. So primary deficit basically means what is the requirement for current year excluding the interest payment on previous year. Got it? So this is as simple as this. Let's say government is saying that 5.9% is the total fiscal deficit, but it includes the interest payment as well. So when we remove the interest payments, what we get is primary deficit. Primary deficit, which is the current year's borrowing is just 2.3% of GDP, right? And what is the formula to calculate primary deficit? You need to just subtract interest payment from total fiscal deficit. For example, in previous slide I told you 17,86,816 crore is the total fiscal deficit of the government of India in 2023-24, right? And interest payment out of this is 10,79,971 crore. This is the interest payment on previous loans. This also we need to borrow because this we have to pay every year till the bonds mature, right? Now, when we remove this from total fiscal deficit, what we get is this year's fresh borrowing. So, primary deficit is 7,06,845 crore, which is 2.3% of GDP. But there is one important term that we need to understand. What is the meaning of zero primary deficit? Zero primary deficit means what? Primary deficit means what? This year's borrowing. Zero primary deficit means there is no borrowing this year. All the borrowing is for paying interest. Got it? For example, in previous example, let's say you do not have to borrow anything this year. That 500 you do not want to borrow. How much you need to borrow then? 100. 100 is your fiscal deficit. How much is the interest payment? 100. So what is 100 minus 100? 0. Right? And that is what happens here. Your fiscal deficit, let's say in this example, if 17,86,816 crore is the fiscal deficit of the government, and if this instead of 10 lakh, this was 17,86,816 crore, if this was this much, meaning what? All the fiscal deficit is actually the interest payment on previous loans. There is no fresh borrowing this year. In that case, primary deficit will be 0. So this is the description of the term primary deficit. I think I have clarified it in a very simple language with the help of examples. And if you have any more doubts, then please put them in the comment section below. I will try to answer them. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.